Welcome back to another fabulous week here on From Mrs. to Ms. I'm your host, Andrea Kanoki. I'm being joined today by the wonderful Dr. Sarah Hensley. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Sarah Hensley has a PhD in social psychology and has been studying the science of relationships for over 15 years. She's an expert in attachment science, which very accurately predicts relationship behavior. I had to get that one down. Attachment style predicts how people handle conflict, how they communicate in romantic relationships, and how and why they can feel triggered or upset by their partners. That makes sense. So, in addition, Dr. Hensley is an expert in the science of attraction, and she understands the deep underlying reasons why certain people are attracted to others. She has coached thousands of clients on how to find and keep healthy and happy romantic relationships. She is confident in her ability to help individuals repair any relationship, even when you've broken up for months, divorce has been filed, or when couples counseling has failed. Sarah's services include group hybrid coaching, one-on-one coaching, couples coaching, and executive coaching. Wow, you are a busy lady.
I am, yeah.
Oh my gosh, we were just talking about that a little bit before we started, and just all of the things trying to keep up with. Plus, you have 4 kids, all in sports. Crazy, crazy. What a businesswoman. I love that. So let's start at the beginning. How did your journey lead you into specializing in attachment science? And
Yeah.
also, I need to know what this Carline relationship advice is. So,
Yeah. I'll just sort of give you the, from beginning to end, but I'll keep it somewhat brief because I could probably go on for a while. But essentially, I was in my first marriage. I got married when I was 26 years old, and that marriage was a complete dumpster fire. There was a lot of really serious problems in the marriage. There were a ton of red flags that I ignored before I got married. And I really, in graduate school, I started studying the relationship between stress and the body and chronic disease and the immune system. And then that kind of moved over into looking specifically at relational stress and stress inside of relationships and the effect on our mental health as well as our physical health. And then I was really studying narcissism for a while because my ex ended up having some of our marriage counselors sort of suggest that he was on the narcissistic spectrum. So I really went down the rabbit hole with narcissism and sort of became an expert in narcissism. But then I landed really hard on attachment because there was so much good science surrounding attachment theory. And I just really fell in love with it. And the fact that it had been around for so long. So in science in general, theories are oftentimes what we call falsified, meaning that somebody purports a theory, we've got a small amount of data to support it, and then a number of studies come out to sort of falsify that previous data or show that that data was not necessarily correct. And that happens maybe because the populations that they used were a little wonky or their methodology wasn't great or something like that. And what I was really intrigued by in terms of attachment science was that it had been around since the 1950s. And there have been hundreds of thousands of studies on it. And it's a theory that's yet to be falsified in terms of its original premises. And so that is very, very solid science when we can have that many studies and yet it's unable to be falsified, right?
Yeah.
And so the more studies that happen where a theory is not falsified, the more confidence we can have in it. And so I spent a lot of years reading on attachment science, trying to understand the relationship that I was in my own marriage dynamics and trying to fix it. And ultimately, I was unsuccessful, partially because of the problems that he had, but also partially because I knew so much, but I didn't know how to actually fix myself, right? And I've learned in this journey that knowledge just doesn't equal healing. And that was the mistake that I was making for so long. I was gathering so much knowledge, so much science, in an understanding of the science. But in terms of, okay, I know that I have fearful avoidant attachment. Now, what do I do to actually heal that and repair that and change myself?
Wow.
That part didn't come in till well over a decade into my journey of understanding. And I
Wow.
had to hit a really, really bad place. So I went through a really brutal divorce, a really brutal custody battle that sort of bankrupted me and was extremely emotionally taxing. And then shortly after that was over, just actually 2 weeks after that battle ended, my ex passed away
Oh
from
no.
his addiction issues that were a large part of the problems in our marriage.
Mm.
Um, and so, and then right before that, my mom, who was kind of my biggest emotional support system, and I would say a real strong attachment figure, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So I became her caregiver. My kids were grieving. My dog ended up dying. And then all of the stress, I sort of had my nervous system just couldn't take it anymore. And I woke up one day with a very severe vestibular migraine that lasted 8 solid months. And the prognosis for that diagnosis, if people are familiar with it, it's kind of a rare diagnosis, but it's really, really poor. And
Mm.
I hit a rock bottom place emotionally. And I knew that part of this was a spiritual issue, part of it was a psychological issue. I had had all of my attachment figures sort of ripped away. And I didn't mention that the boyfriend that I had, who was a dismissive avoidant, and I knew he was a dismissive avoidant. I'm still trying to make it work anyway, which is, again, contrary to I know what I know, but I'm not
Not
healed, right?
implementing it. Yeah.
These types of partners. He broke up with me on the night we received my mom's diagnosis.
Oh
And
my goodness.
like, it was just sort of every attachment figure that I had was sort of ripped away from me really quickly at one time.
Yeah.
So the attachment ones that I did have just kind of got set on fire. And I think it's just what caused my nervous system to sort of have this break, right? And that's where
Yeah.
the vestibular migraine came from. And the more I learned about migraine, about how, it is a disease of an overtaxed nervous system. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And
wow.
so much new research coming out to show that migraines are solely stress induced,
Wow.
which is interesting.
Yes,
Because a
very.
lot of people aren't recognizing that their nervous system is really what's causing, their migraines. I really went hard into healing, and it started with going to God first because I was at rock bottom. I didn't even have the capacity to really learned that migraines are a stress induced disorder.
Mm-hmm.
They are just completely I'm not saying that other things can't contribute to migraines in sort of a perfect storm, but without the stress component, they're not going to happen. And
Yes.
so, I was baffled by the fact that I had gone to 3 or 4 different neurologists and none of them knew how to treat this. And then I
Mm-hmm.
found Alan Gordon's research,
Mm-hmm.
who's amazing, and Nicole Sachs' research, and all about how the nervous system can cause chronic pain of all sorts, including migraines. And I had to get stabilized physically before I
Mm-hmm.
could do the emotional work and the attachment healing. And that really came from my faith in God, and just my faith in God, I think, stabilized my nervous system enough where the migraines sort of dissipated about 80%. And
Wow.
then I was able to, because it affected my vision, it affected my balance, it affected my ability to read a screen. I couldn't really read a screen. And so when I got stabilized enough, and that was really all God, I have to give all the glory to God on that. That's when I went to the scientific literature and I said, okay, I've done a lot of spiritual work here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the science behind attachment healing?
Mm.
I understand
Okay.
what my problems are, but how do I fix them? Right.
Yes. Yes.
So, I just really dug through the science on emotional processing, the science on neuroregulation, the science on post traumatic growth and trauma healing. And I really just found that there's just 2 areas that we have to really work on, because the entire human experience is broken down into thoughts, emotions, and behavior. There's no human
Mm-hmm.
experience outside of our thoughts, emotion, and behavior. And so I thought, well, the behavior is the end result.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do about our thoughts and our emotions? So I looked up these scientifically validated and tested approaches to taking authority over your thought world, really, becoming a master of your own mind, as well as how to properly process emotions and regulate your nervous system at the same time. Because that's often the missing piece, is that
Mm-hmm.
people will go off and they'll feel their feelings, but they do so in a very chaotic way that actually makes the brain sort of scared of that experience.
Okay.
And so, and then we have the other group of people. So that's really the anxious folks. And we have another group of more avoidant folks who use a lot of emotional suppression. So the brain is deciding before they really even feel their emotions that they're too unsafe to feel. And so when you pair together processing emotions with signals to the nervous system that you are safe, then you can really complete the emotional cycle of processing. And then the emotional energy can sort of diminish and be released. We're not hanging on to it, and it's not creating the triggers, right? Like we're diminishing the triggers by doing that. And the thought work is really important because the thoughts are actually one half of our emotional experience. Emotions are the feelings we have in our body, plus our perceptions or thoughts about what's happening to us. And so I knew it was like, if I can work on those two pieces, then my behavior will change. Right. And it did. And I was what we call in science and research an N of one, a population of one, right? It was a self-experiment. But I was very confident because these approaches had been tested in the science and shown to really help improve people's emotional well-being, people's, facilitate behavior change, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just started making videos about it. I didn't have a business. I didn't have anything. And I gathered a really large audience on TikTok very quickly. And that is when I thought,
I'm onto something.
People obviously are interested in this, right?
Yes.
And how can we bring this to people on a larger scale? And that's what started the Dating Decoder.
Wow. What an incredible story. And I'm sorry for the loss of your previous spouse and everything that you went through. And I think that is so true in what you're saying. People often want to just hear about it and they want to listen and they want to, figure out how to fix themselves. And what we do so often is we research, we listen to podcasts, we listen to all these things, all the little TikTok videos and everything, but we don't know how to implement that into our own lives and fix it. Yeah. So I love that you were kind of fixing that. Okay, so how did you come up with the car line relationship advice? Were you literally sitting in your car line picking up your kids? I love it.
So I have 4 kids between me and my second husband. So he's got 2 biological children. I have 2 biological children. He's actually getting ready to adopt my 2, which is a beautiful thing. And it's such an amazing, that was all God as well.
Yeah.
And my house is noisy. I had some soundproofing in my office, but I've got 2 dogs and they bark and there's kids running around, and it's sometimes very difficult to make content because I'm making a recording or a video in my office, and then the dog comes up and starts barking right outside my office, or, and then I have to have all these lights right in this room. And in your car, the sound is great. There's no microphone needed. The lighting is perfection. And I could do it. I have an hour of my day just blocked off to be able to pick up my youngest from school and take her home, because I love that. I love to take her to school and pick her up. It's just another extra connection time that we have. Yeah. And so I just started going into the car line early and sitting there. And that's when I started making my videos. And it requires very little editing. It is, the lights taken care of, the sounds taken care of, and people seem to just be fine with it, right? Yeah. Occasionally I do get somebody that's like, why are you making a video in your car? And I'm like, well, if I have to explain the backstory, it's because I just started doing that and people thought it was funny or cute or interesting. And so I just kind of stuck with it. And now I almost never make videos in my office because
it's
a pain to get all of the sound well and the lighting well and the,
absolutely
done. So
it is. And I think it makes it look real. Like people are just like, oh, she's literally just sitting there and then just chatting. And it seems more authentic, I think, than us planning and preparing for everything. So I love it.
I think people have enjoyed it, and it's something I enjoy doing. And it's a slice of time that being a busy mom and running a business, right? It gives me a slice of time without interruption.
Absolutely.
Nobody's going to interrupt me in that space. So
I think it's perfect. So, okay, I want to talk about attachment styles. This is your area of expertise, and I genuinely love hearing and talking about it. I love watching little videos. I've seen some really cool videos on YouTube, little stick people kind of showing how you can go if you have an anxious attachment and you have an avoidant, how that kind of combusts a little bit. and the vicious cycle that you can find yourself in.
Mhm.
So if you would just kind of recap what the different attachment styles are for the listeners so they're familiar as we continue on through the interview.
Yeah, I love this question because there are so many people out there that are still touting older science, that they're just not up to date with the newer science, and they're oversimplifying attachment or overcomplicating attachment. And there's this real middle ground where the science now shows that there's 4 attachment styles. And a lot of people want to break it into 3, which is not accurate. There is the securely attached person, and of course that is what we all want to achieve. And there are people out there that are what we call born secures, meaning that they grew up in households where their parents just did a really good job of providing them with emotional attunement, emotional support, problem solving skills, what we call metacognitive skills, which are skills associated with controlling our own thought world and not using cognitive distortions or extreme, types of thinking. And they're really good at communicating. They're good at resolving conflict peacefully because that was modeled to them, right, by their own parents. Their own parents may have gotten in a disagreement or two, throughout the marriage or even many, but they didn't go run off and shut the door and yell at each other. They talked it out, and they often did so in front of their kids in a way that gave their kids those skills, right, of listening, of being emotionally attuned, of validation, of what we call creating active solutions that are actually going to make a difference and change the situation. And so secure people just had really good parents that had a healthy and loving relationship, and a lot of what they learned was through modeling, right, of what their parents were able to do. And the parents were able to really interact with their kids in ways that demonstrated and modeled good emotional regulation skills, where we don't avoid talking about emotions, but we also don't scream our emotions either, right?
Yes.
We can talk about them and we can acknowledge them. And even when we get a little bit more dysregulated, the goal is to calm down first and then speak about our emotions. So they just naturally had really great role models, but that's actually not the majority of people. The majority of people grow up in environments where they have parents who don't give them enough emotional attunement or even any emotional attunement. And those tend to be our dismissive avoidant folks, which is one insecure attachment style. We have parents that sometimes really did a good job of giving their child emotional support and attunement and all of the things, but then other times they were just too absent because maybe they worked a lot, or there was a lot of kids in the family, or maybe grandma was sick and had to be taken care of. And so the parents were pulled away by something else, and it made that attunement very inconsistent. And whenever we get inconsistent reinforcement, we will develop attachment anxiety. It also creates addiction. So then that's how the anxious preoccupied is created, which is another attachment style. Then we have, so those are the attachments that lie on each end of the insecure spectrum, the anxious preoccupied and the dismissive avoidant. But then we have this really unique attachment style that a lot of coaches just plain leave out. And it's baffling to me, which is called the fearful avoidant. And the fearful avoidant is a combination between the anxious preoccupied and the dismissive avoidant. They actually have the entire attachment spectrum where they can sort of swing over into anxiety, where they really want connection and they really try to get connection. And then they, depending upon what might happen in the relationship, they can at any time swing over into that dismissive avoidant end of the spectrum and shift and go cold and withdraw. And we have far more folks with that attachment style than the research originally suggested. The research is starting to catch up with, we have a lot of those folks out there, and we need to recognize this as its own unique style and break people up into anxious and avoidant. It just doesn't help anybody because it's not capturing the complexity of people, right? It's not capturing this third group of people that in the insecure attachment space that really need help. And they're not going to be helped by thinking that they're an anxious preoccupied when they're really a fearful avoidant. And I see that a lot. A lot of people come into my practice and say, I'm an anxious preoccupied. And then when I do an assessment, I'm like, actually, you're fearful avoidant. You've just always picked really avoidant people. And so that's pushed you into feeling very anxious inside of your relationships, which is why you think you were this anxious, preoccupied attachment.
Wow. So we have the secure, we have the dismissive avoidant, we have the anxious attachment, and then we have this fearful
Mhm.
avoidant, which is right in the middle of all
And like
of them,
they can
basically.
flip flop. They can come
Flip
over to
flop.
the anxious side and then they can flip over into the avoidant side. And sometimes they can do that within just one conversation, right? They can
Wow.
be like, no, we need to talk about this now. We need to work this out. Please talk to me, please. And then there's this moment of pain. And fearful avoidance' biggest wound is betrayal. And so if they feel betrayed by their partner by being hurt
Yeah.
in any given moment, that can cause them to be like, you know what, fine, forget it. Like, I'm done here, and like leave and slam the door, right? And shut down and go cold. And so I call it the grasping at straws attachment style, because they
Yeah.
will really, a fearful avoidant will get very, very creative in trying to get their attachment needs met by either using anxious strategies, or what we call activating strategies, or avoidant strategies, which we call deactivating strategies.
Wow. So how do you even handle a fearful avoidant? I mean, what do? You probably feel like you're dealing with Jekyll and Hyde for most of the
Very much
time, right?
so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And a lot of people think that they're dealing with narcissism when really they're dealing with fearful avoidance, because fearful avoidance can sometimes be a little bit manipulative, but it's often not purposeful manipulation. It's just a
Right.
desperate attempt to try to get their needs met. Right. And they don't
Hmm.
know that they're being manipulative, and they're not being manipulative out of trying to be manipulative and trying to hurt you. They're just trying to get their needs met. And they're unfortunately so dysregulated, and they've learned such dysfunctional behaviors in childhood that these are all coming out when they're triggered. So I used to be a
Wow.
fearful avoidant. That was my attachment style. And so I can say for sure that they experience the most pain, and they often cause a lot of pain inside of relationships as well.
Yeah. And then the narcissist is someone, they just don't really care if they're doing
Yeah.
wrong.
When we talk narcissism, we have to realize that narcissism is sort of climbing the ranks up into the level of personality of someone, right? And personality is more stable than just habitual learned patterns of behavior, which is really what attachment is.
Yeah.
Attachment is learned patterns of responding based upon a psychological trigger. And so we can really, learn different patterns of behavior,
Right.
and if we learn how to control our mind and how to control our emotions, then we become somebody who becomes a conscious, deliberate person who can execute a sort of a planned, rational behavior over a trauma response. But
Hmm.
narcissists have built, up this entire sort of defense mechanism that is part of their personality. So it's really deeply part of who they are. And that
Hmm.
means that it's going to show up not just in the romantic relationship, it's going to show up in friendships, it's going to show up in work relationships, it's going to
Yep.
show up in, with their kids' sports coach, it's going to show up in all types of relationships. And so it's a lot, I'd say, different than attachment. It's definitely another layer.
Okay. And would I be right in saying that a narcissist really is not going to be able to change and fix who they are, whereas the
Right.
other attachment styles, you
That's right.
can strive to be better, to change, to do
Mhm.
different things. And the ultimate goal, obviously, is to get us to the secure attachment.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So the literature really suggests that like 1% of people with true NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, actually make enough change
Hmm.
through years of therapy, and we're talking years of therapy here, to become
Yeah.
self-aware enough to begin making changes to their behavior. Because narcissists are the kings and queens of rationalizing their poor behavior to make them the victim and everyone else the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And with attachment, yes, people can put up really big defense mechanisms, but again, those are just learned patterns, right?
Yeah.
Like
It just seems less intentional.
I saw
Yeah.
dad get very defensive with mom when mom would say,
Yeah.
"Hey, something's wrong here," or dad get really reactive or whatever, or mom, be very codependent and anxious towards dad. So
Hmm.
those things have just been learned through modeling.
Yeah.
They're not part of who we are as
Yes.
a person. They're not deeply
Yes.
integrated into one's personality.
Hmm. Interesting. And so you had mentioned the word anxious, preoccupied. Is that different than just, I've always just heard it as an anxious attachment? What makes it
Mhm.
preoccupied. I just like your choice
Yeah.
of words.
So people with, yes. So some people, again, just use those older terms of anxious attachment, which is really
Hmm.
breaking people up into anxious or avoidant. Again, missing an entire group of individuals that have both sides to their attachment.
Yeah.
So the anxious preoccupied would be the most accurate scientific term for someone who just stays on that anxious side of the spectrum. They never pop over into that avoidant side where they want to withdraw from their partner. It doesn't mean that they won't feel hurt or they won't feel like I need to give this person up. It's just they're a lot less likely to actually move away from the partner. When they feel hurt,
Right.
they want to move towards the partner to try to work it out and to try to continually avoid abandonment inside of the relationship. So the preoccupied piece is because they suffer from really significant rumination or preoccupation with their partner. So the
Mm.
anxious preoccupied spends a lot of time inside of their relationship thinking about, what does my partner want me to be or need me to be for me to be loved and for me to not be abandoned inside of this relationship? So they're very, very preoccupied with the other person. Whereas dismissive avoidant folks, they are very, what we call self-directed. They're very preoccupied with self. They're very focused on themselves, and they really miss cues for connection with others. So they spend very, very little time thinking about
Yeah.
their partner, whereas the anxious preoccupied person spends a lot of time preoccupied with somebody else.
Wow. So can those two actually work? Can an anxious and an avoidant actually work?
It can,
Uh-huh.
but it usually requires at least one person. So it depends on, of course, what is your definition of working? Is that staying together, or is it staying together and actually being happy inside of your relationship? And so what I would say
Ooh.
is the likelihood that they're going to both be happy inside of the relationship is very slim if
Mm.
neither partner does the work.
Yeah.
But sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, if we have one person that really does the work to show up secure, they become a really great model to their partner. And remember, we learn a lot
Oh,
with modeling.
yeah.
And they sort of set boundaries and set expectations that the other person then realizes they have to step up and meet if they want to continue in the relationship. And it can make a really profound difference. But usually that's for people where the other partner who's not doing the work is more mild to moderate in their attachment insecurity. If we have someone that's very severely attachment insecure, it usually doesn't matter if the other person shows up secure. Those traits are so habitual, and they're so hardwired in that unless they were to do their own work to
Yeah.
learn new patterns, the other
Not gonna
partner
happen.
it's not.
Mm. But I think that's a good thing to kind of recognize probably early on. If you're not willing to put in the work, then
That's
what you
right.
doing? so, so something that stood out to me on one of your videos on TikTok, I had a good time kind of trolling through those, is you said when you've got a good thing, it's better to just work on it through working on yourself.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about that. I love that statement.
Yes. So I think we operate from a lot of extremes inside of relationships, and that depends on your attachment style. So, the anxious person is willing to, so the anxious preoccupied or a fearful avoidant who's really leaning into their anxious side because they have an avoidant partner. They're
Hmm.
often willing to hold on to the relationship at all costs, even when their needs are going largely unmet.
Mm.
And, that can be dangerous and detrimental. So they need to work. If they were to work on themselves, they likely would be able to set the boundaries that they needed to either get their needs met or to ultimately leave the relationship that is unfulfilling to them. The
Wow.
avoidant, on the other hand, their boundaries around themselves and their own time and their own space and their own wants and needs are, hyper strong. They're too strong. They're too rigid. And so, what they can do is they can, work on themselves enough and do the work enough to be able to give more inside of their relationships. But
Yeah.
oftentimes the DA jumps to just severing the relationship when
Yep.
there's any
It's
type of
easier.
conflict, right? It's easier to just sever it and walk away. And again, the fearfuls that are leaning into the avoidant side will pick up that trait as well and will behave in that manner. So what I would say is, you cannot control or change someone else. And
Yep.
if you have a relationship where there's a lot of great things, but there's some really key pain points that if they continued, over time would get worse, or just would essentially not fulfill you, or would hurt you bad enough that, it would cause too much pain to stay. You have to be able to do the work on yourself to either set the boundaries you need to set and leave, or to concede and to be able to meet your partner's attachment needs some more, so that, the relationship overall changes for the better. So
Wow.
the only way that we change our relationships is by changing ourselves.
Yep.
We have no power to control another person at all. We think we do, and we don't, right?
Yep.
The best we've got there is the science of manipulation, which does exist, but that's not healthy love. That's not something I'm going to teach. I wouldn't want to be with someone who is only, with me because I'm manipulating them into being with me.
Yeah.
Right? That is a house of cards. That's inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's the foundation is loving yourself. And I've talked about this in many episodes. It comes up over and over again. I think everybody is finally starting to learn that you can't really truly love somebody else until you love yourself. And it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
It is really hard. It sounds so simple. It sounds so easy, like if you just did. And there's so many things that you can try and do, but it's really getting your mindset to continually think that way and to believe it. That's really the key, right? Believing it.
Is believing it. And you hit the nail on the head. It comes through repetition.
Yeah.
So we can't just hear something once and be like, oh, I'm a changed person because I have this, revelation mentally.
Yeah.
Old habits, human beings are always a product of conditioning, most of it. Yes, we are motivation-based beings, but conditioning is pretty much why we behave the way that we do. I mean, it's just either through what we call classical conditioning, which is the conditioning of automatic responses. But most of our behavior is a product somewhat of operant conditioning, which is being reinforced, essentially rewarded or punished for certain behaviors, right? And so unfortunately, we're rewarded and we're punished for things in childhood that end up making us very dysfunctional in our adult romantic relationships. For example, the dismissive avoidant is oftentimes punished for emotional expression in childhood, right? There's no room for the dismissive avoidant to express emotions, or they're punished, or they're dismissed, or they're ignored. So what do they learn to do as adults inside of their relationships? Not talk about feelings, right? And not want to hear about your feelings, because that is so foreign to them and so overwhelming to them. So So yes, we are definitely a product of conditioning.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard to we're all trying to strive to figure out exactly where we lie on that spectrum, who we are and what we are. And I've noticed even in myself wanting to believe that I'm something that I'm not, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like totally secure. And then you quickly find out that you're not when you get in a relationship where you find yourself chasing. Right. And then it's like, it's so hard doing the work. And then you're in another one. And now you're the one who's like the avoidant and they're chasing. And you're like, oh my God, it's
too much. Right. I have so many people that come through my practice and they say things like, well, I'm really secure, but I've been in this relationship for 10 years with this DA and he meets none of my needs. And I'm like, you're not secure, because would have set the ultimate boundary of leaving that relationship a long time ago. So it's easy to think that you've got it all together until someone tests you.
Yes.
That's where the sort of the rubber meets the road in terms of seeing how secure are you? Can you hold your boundaries? Can you communicate your needs without fear? Can you resolve conflict without becoming emotionally reactive or leaving and stonewalling? There's going to be tests, and a lot of healing can be done on your own, but you're never going to know what you don't know. And you're never going to see the spots that you need to still work on until somebody else gets into the picture and starts trying to trigger you, right? Unintentionally or intentionally.
Yes, absolutely. So what does it mean to actually speak life into your relationships?
Yeah. So one thing I wish that people would understand, because it dramatically changed my life. And when I say dramatic, I cannot emphasize enough how dramatically this changed my life. And this is a very biblical principle. So it was something that came through my faith, which is there's
Mhm.
just such life and death in the power of the tongue. And the words that we speak really start the ball rolling of creating our reality. So 3 different disciplines have shown this to be true.
Okay.
We have the discipline of physics that's really shown that, in terms of the law of attraction and quantum energy, that, what we speak and what we believe ends up coming sort of to us from this, attracting back this energetic field or this vibration.
Mhm.
Psychologists call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you speak it, you're going to act it, which then
Mhm.
brings it back to you, right? Because you're acting in ways that are generating those outcomes that you are wanting.
Okay.
And then it's in the Bible. Like, as a man speaks, so is he. And there's life and death in the power of the tongue. And there's so many verses in the Bible about speaking life. And so there's actually, some people that are in, the field of quantum physics that are really starting to speak out about the creation of our own consciousness, that like we
Ah.
actually moment by moment are sort of creating our own realities through our consciousness, and how those realities are able to be manipulated based on our thoughts and our words. And so if I think a perfect example of this is like, if you wake up every day and you say, gosh, I'm such a loser,
Yeah.
people are going to treat you like you're a loser.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of experiences that make you feel like a loser, right?
Mhm.
Negative experiences. But when you wake up every day and you're like, you know what? Like, I'm a good person. I'm going to go
Yeah.
after it today. I'm going to put my heart and soul into today. And you're going to find that a lot more good things happen to you that day. And that's not a coincidence, right? I think
Right.
it is part of creating our own consciousness as we go
Mhm.
along. And so speaking life into your relationship really means that when you get on board to make this change, you are willing to speak positive things about your relationship, positive things about your partner. You stop taking the focus as much off the negative, and you start putting all your attention, all your focus, and your conversations toward what is going right here.
Yeah.
Right. And this is even something I teach in terms of when I teach about non-critical communication through my hybrid program. The very first fundamental component of non-critical communication is asking for what you would like to see in the relationship versus talking about what's going wrong and how it makes you feel.
Okay.
So, for example, if your partner, let's say, is a dismissive avoidant and they're highly addicted to their phones, dismissive avoidants
Mhm.
love their phones because it's a distraction, and suppression
Yeah.
happens through distraction. So if you are getting upset that your partner is always looking at their phone, doesn't acknowledge you when you walk into the room, is not giving you a lot of attention because they're playing games on their phone, or they're working on their phone, or they're immersed in their device. If you go to them and you say, you know what, you're always on your phone and you don't pay enough attention to me, and that really makes me feel insignificant and hurt inside of this relationship. Well, the dismissive avoidant, they're going to take that as criticism, and any little amount of criticism hits their defectiveness wound. It immediately starts their shutdown process of their
Mhm.
deactivation process. They're very, very, very sensitive to criticism. But if you went to your partner and you spoke life and you said, hey, you know what I really like inside of our relationship are the times when we're connected without distraction. And I would just really love to have more of that inside of our relationship. Can we work together to carve out some intentional time where we're not distracted? A dismissive avoidant person, there was no criticism there. In fact,
Yes.
you actually convince them that they're doing something right, which is, there are times where I pay attention to you, and they're just asking for more of that, right? There's
Yeah.
no criticism there. And so they're usually like, yeah, well, what are you thinking? Do you want to have a date night weekly? Like, what can we do? You're going to see a dismissive avoidant light up when you
Yeah.
come and you speak that life, right? And then you're going to get the need met. But when you
Yes.
come in with the criticism, the 3 words into it, they're going to start shutting.
Yeah. Well, nobody likes to be criticized and feel
Nobody
like they're being scolded or told what to do.
Right.
And then it becomes more out of spite, right? Where you're like, I'm not on my phone all the time. And then you find yourself just doing it.
Right. They're going to get
Just to do it.
defensive, and
Yes.
just avoidance, they'll push back. If they think you're trying to control them in any way through criticism
Yes.
or pressure, they rebel against that very
Oh
hard.
my gosh, I am clearly seeing which side of the spectrum I am on as you're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. That's me. So, so you've had a chance to work with some amazing celebrities. Yeah. So because they have issues too, right? And that I focused in on one of your videos that you were talking about this specifically, and you were like, they have issues too. And it was really like, I was like, yes, that is so true, because we think of them, we put them on this high pedestal all the time because they're celebrities. We strive to be like them, and we do it in all aspects of our lives with, I want to look like them. I want to have, cut my weight. I want to work out. I want to do all of these things, forgetting that they have the resources for all of these things that a lot of us don't have. So what do you say about us comparing them to everyday people all the time?
Yes.
And like, just tell us a little bit about, obviously not your specific situations with them, but like, what are the big differences, if there are any?
Right. So I would say, first of all, we have to understand that the key to secure attachment is having your nervous system stay in a state of safety and regulation. That's the key. That's what secure people are really good at doing, that insecure people can't accomplish, because they have so many wounds. And so the wounds trigger their nervous system into a state of danger, which makes them act in a trauma response. Essentially, when we become attachment secure, we learn to stabilize our nervous system, and we learn to recognize the cues of when our nervous system is becoming dysregulated. And then we have the tools to quickly ground ourselves and bring us back to safety, to where we can be very intentional in how we speak and how we behave and how we act. Right? When we're behaving from trauma responding, it's never going to go well. We're always going to be behaving poorly. So the key to secure attachment is to be able to regulate your nervous system effectively. It's effectively being able to bring your nervous system into a state of safety at will. So when we do that, we become very conscious, very deliberate individuals who kind of get to choose how they behave. Well, when we're insecurely attached and we become triggered, our nervous systems become dysregulated and we go into a trauma response. And we know that self-regulation acts like a gas tank. Like, we only have so much regulation ability in any given day. And there are a lot of outside stressors that will sort of rob our gas from our gas tank, steal gas away from our gas tank. And so I would say celebrities have a lot of outside pressures that disrupt their relationship. They have heavy scrutiny, right? Where they may be exposed to a lot of negative information about themselves that may or may not be true. That is going out to the masses. Their jobs are very high stress. So they might be, if they're in the film industry or TV industry, they might be traveling a lot to where they're filming, and they may be away from their partner for a long time. Of course, people in that industry as well are sometimes in intimate scenes with other people, right? And nobody would want to see their husband or wife,
I don't know how they do it,
watching that, right? Somebody else. And so, what I would say is their job in and of itself is very stressful. And the more external stress you have, the less capacity you have to show up well inside of your relationship, because it's stealing the capacity to stay regulated. Right. And so I think the reason we see such a high divorce rate in Hollywood is, one, just the amount of stress from the scrutiny, from the amount of hours that they work from traveling, from all of the things that they do associated with their job, that takes them away from quality time with their partner, as well as steals from their ability of their nervous system to feel safe. Right. And then if you have your relationship, not just you, but your relationship in under scrutiny. A lot of rumors get started and things that are reported that aren't true, and it's very hurtful to these celebrities. And it's really made me empathize with them on a whole nother level that I think if I'd never met some of these people, I wouldn't have had that empathy, because you look at them and you go, oh, they're so famous. Like, what problems do they have? But listen, fame and money and power do not buy love. They don't. And they are human just like the rest of us. And they want healthy love just like the rest of us. But because of the very nature of what they do, they have so much external pressures and so many things that can disrupt their romantic relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's got to be just tough all the time. Like you said, especially when there are the rumors going around. And then on top of it, you're in shows and movies with other, opposite sex, and you're having to do these love scenes. I mean, that's rough. That is really, really rough.
For sure.
So let's talk about matching energy. I love this topic. I've heard it across the board that you should match your partner's energy to keep the relationship alive. Do you believe that?
Heck to the no. no. That is a hard no,
Hard no.
right?
Uh,
You show up authentically in your relationship with the
mhm.
energy that you have, and you choose a partner that it works with, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if you are with someone who is, let's say, a dismissive avoidant, and so dismissive avoidance will detach over time, and they're usually just, they do the slow creep away throughout their
Mhm.
relationship. If your strategy is like, well, when they pull away, I'm going to pull away, right?
Yep. Then what
Then,
happens?
and you're in hopes that they're going to notice the disconnection and feel a sense of loss and only come back to you. Essentially, you're deciding to stay in a relationship with someone that only feels interested in you and only wants to come close to you when you go away.
Yeah.
And the best case scenario is you're going to have a lifetime of back and forth. You're going to have a
Mm.
lifetime of pushing and pulling. And that is so disruptive and dysregulating to the nervous system,
Mhm.
especially if you have a fearful avoidant attachment style or an anxious attachment style. They crave stability and reliability and consistency in the
Yeah.
relationship in order for a relationship to work. I would say that is, and let me really clarify that for the fearful avoidant, that is what they need. It's not always what they're attracted to and what they get themselves into, but it is what they need in order to be a secure person inside of a relationship. But they tend to
Wow.
really attract partners because our attachment style really determines who we choose.
Yeah.
We tend to attract partners that are only going to give us that push pull. And
Yeah.
so I say exceed energy. If they pull, like, and if it's a habit that they pull away, then exceed that energy and leave. Right? Exceed that energy and leave. Now, I would say that is totally true for a dating relationship. If you
Yeah.
have kids with somebody, you're married to someone, obviously there's more incentive to see if you can repair the relationship first before you make that decision.
Mhm.
My go-to for married people and people that share children is, let's always do what we can to try to make it work. And then if we've tried everything we can, you're showing up secure, you've done the work yourself, and they're still behaving really poorly and not meeting your needs and pulling away all the time, then it's time to think about exiting the relationship. But if you're just dating this person,
Yeah.
work on yourself and let them go. Let them
Yes.
figure out, let the loss of you be one of the pain points in their life that maybe prompts them to grow and reflect and take accountability for themselves and start to make the changes that they need to stop pulling
Mhm.
away all the time inside of a relationship.
Right. Do you think that's very similar in dating when it's like when you like the chase? I've kind of always been like that, where you like that little bit of a chase where they're not like just calling you all the time and reaching out all the time. You want that little bit of space so that you can feel something, you can miss them. Is this, am I describing?
It's a no-go for me. I don't want that, right? Because so
What
what
is
ends up,
it in us that wants that? Why do
right?
we want that?
I will tell you why you want it, because
Please.
somewhere along the line in childhood, somebody gave you some intermittent reinforcement where they
Hmm.
would meet your needs and then pull it away, and then meet your needs and then pull it away. And whenever again we have an intermittent reinforcement, it creates anxiety as well as addiction, right?
Mm.
Anything that is inherently addicting contains intermittent reinforcement, like drug use, gambling, you name it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when someone has experienced intermittent reinforcement in their lives and they've associated anxiety with intimacy.
Hmm.
Anxiety is a fear response. Well, it has the same feeling as excitement. So that's where it becomes really interesting to remember and important to remember that emotion is made up of a feeling, which is like the rapid heart rate, the shaky hands, like the butterflies in the stomach, plus our thoughts about what is actually happening to us. And so fear or anxiety and excitement have the same feeling in the body.
Okay.
The only thing that differentiates those two emotions is our perception of what's happening. And so
Right.
when we make the wrong perception, when we have the incorrect perception, which the incorrect perception is often, oh, but they're so cute and they're so sexy and I like it when I talk to them and it's a new relationship. And what you're perceiving is that, like, intimacy is this type of intimacy that you're receiving, which is actually inconsistent and not healthy, is exciting. And you
Mhm.
mistake that for excitement and for chemistry when really it's an anxiety response that you have miss the mark in identifying, and you are, you're being made to feel this fear response, but you are mistaking it for excitement and chemistry when really it's
Oh,
anxiety.
wow. Yeah.
And that is
That's
not what healthy
it.
love feels like. Healthy love, and I never had healthy love. I never had healthy,
Yeah.
I would say my mom was the closest thing to ever giving me any kind of healthy, loving relationship. And she
Mhm.
is dismissive avoidant. So of course, in my childhood, she did struggle with emotions and with being vulnerable, and, through her
Mhm.
words. Now my mom's a very amazing acts of service person who, I mean, she'd give you the shirt off of her back, and she'd come and help you with your laundry and watch your kids and do all these things. But it's really hard for her to hug me and like say, I really love you.
Oh,
It's hard for her to do that. I mean, she does sometimes, but I can
yeah.
tell that
It's
it's
a
hard.
struggle. Yeah.
And then I grew up with a bipolar father who was very push pull because his moods were so up and down.
Oh.
And so, I learned inside of my childhood that love meant chaos, and partially love meant lack of intimacy. And so, of course,
Mhm.
that became part of my profile of who I ended up choosing, because we
Yeah.
choose people that reinforce the wounds that we already have. Our choice in partner when we're insecure often becomes this giant self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Yeah.
if we're given intermittent reinforcement, we're going to choose a DA who's going to give us intermittent reinforcement. If we
Yeah.
grew up with an emotionally unstable parent, we might choose a narcissist that's very emotionally unstable. And that just reinforces that, yep, this is what love really is. And
Mhm.
so I didn't know what healthy love felt like until
Right.
I did the work. And then, I met my second husband. And then it was this totally different experience of just, he was so reliable. He was so consistent. He attached at a healthy pace. He didn't love bomb, yet he didn't ignore me. It was just this,
Mm.
it felt very
Perfect.
easy and very peaceful and very predictable. And,
And
and
you
that
were at a place where you could recognize that.
Yes. And I was like,
Yes.
and instead of feeling like, oh, this is boring, which is normally
Yeah.
what I would feel because I dated somebody secure before, or I would say he was probably tipped a little bit into the anxious side, and I went totally avoidant. And I just wasn't attracted to anybody that was actually giving me a fair amount of attention. I just was never
Yeah.
attracted to them. And then when I did the work and I met my husband, and he was the same on the first date, 3 years in, he's still the same guy and
I
behaving the
love
same.
that.
And I'm, just very, very thankful that I became attracted to peace and stability and reliability inside of
Yeah.
relationships. And that was a big tell for me that,
But
yeah,
we can go back to saying it's when you actually started to work on yourself and put yourself first and recognize those different attributes that he came along. And that's
yep,
kind of what you're saying. Speak it into your life, into your relationship. Yeah, I think mine is maybe a little bit more from I have a disabled brother and sister. And so a lot of time was spent with both of them growing up. I was kind of like, just left to fend for myself at a
yeah,
very, very young age, like 4 years old. And so I think it was a little bit of that, like, oh, they're back. We're going to hang out. And then, oh, they're gone. Yeah, I think that's a
Mhm.
little bit more where mine has come from.
Yep,
But
absolutely.
yeah, just working on it
Absolutely.
is huge. So, in one of your videos, you discuss what the single biggest nervous system regulator is. Can you tell the listeners? And then let's dive into that a little.
Yes, it is authenticity.
Authenticity.
Being
Boom.
your
That's it.
authentic self. I always tell
Love it.
people you need to become secure so you can be the best version of your most authentic self. Right?
Yeah.
Because if your authentic self is someone who flies off the handle all the time, or someone who ghosts and stonewalls and goes cold, like, yes, it's more regulating to you to show up with those patterns, but then other people have to put up with those patterns.
Hmm.
Right. And
Hmm.
you're going to have trouble in your romantic relationships. And so when you get
Yeah.
secure, then you really know I am showing up authentically, but the authentic version of me is a very grounded, very stable, very peaceful person.
Yeah.
Right.
How
And
cool is
so,
that?
but we want to keep our authentic attributes. Like, we don't want to be with anyone who makes us feel like we have to shrink ourselves down, or
Yeah.
we have to suppress a part of ourselves. Right. And I know in
Yeah.
the history of my, relationships prior to my secure relationship with my current husband, there were a lot of people that I was with that I had to shrink myself. Right.
Yeah.
Because I would consider myself a fairly intelligent person. And
Yeah.
so I would date people that were not as intelligent as me. And so I would have to
Yes.
think myself by not engaging in certain types of conversations that I know that they would kind of look at me like, what? Right? Like they
Yeah.
couldn't get to that level.
Yeah.
Or somebody who, for example, is like uber like into tennis. Like I'm never gonna love tennis and I'm never gonna want to play tennis and I'm never gonna like I've tried it and I don't like it. It's nothing I
Yeah.
would do. And so, but like, if there's that pressure of like, no, you need to take lessons, we need to do this together, we need to be together on this, that kind of pressure wouldn't feel good to me. I would need a partner who, if they were
Mm.
into tennis, they could go off and play tennis when they wanted to, but they would be fine with me going off and doing something else, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
we have to be able to show up authentically in order to feel safe.
Yeah. And I think there's that fine line though, right? Between where you want to enjoy other habits and things that people do, their hobbies, and you want to enjoy that and do that with them, but you don't want to lose yourself in the moment, right? Like
Right. Right.
in pretending to be something you're not.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. And, you just, that's where there's just a little bit of where openness to experience comes in, which is kind of a personality trait. Um,
Hmm.
we have to be open to new experiences with our partners because we
Hmm.
might discover that we enjoy things and it's wonderful. It's really healthy to have things that you can do with your partner that you enjoy, hobbies and
Yeah.
activities. But if there's something that just fundamentally is not your jam,
Hmm.
right? Like I hate every minute of this. And I
Yes.
can't see myself ever loving, like ever even tolerating or liking this.
Yeah.
If you're still receiving pressure that no, you have to, start to love this or, we're not going to get along, then it's like, well,
Then it's
obviously,
not a match.
my authenticity is not being able to be honored here.
Yeah. And there's something so special about truly feeling like you are being your authentic self. I've been through in my past relationships a lot of betrayal, a lot of all of that negative stuff. And my current one now, I've spoken about him on here before. He came in hard and heavy, with a lot of like, just I've prayed for you. I know that you're my person, and he was not giving up. And I was like, back off, back off.
Yeah.
But, through him being persistent, but in a good way,
Mhm.
I have become just so authentic. And I tell him that I'm the most authentic I've ever been in this relationship because I'm setting my boundaries and I'm speaking up and
Right.
I'm allowing him to break down that wall a little bit
Yes.
to become into that secure. And so
Right.
I'm just making the point that once you start feeling that and you feel like you're in the right relationship and it's like a whole different ball game,
It is a whole different,
right?
it's a whole different
Whole
ball.
different.
Plenty
Yes.
of
And the fact that we
relationship
settle
history to
for
compare
something
it
else,
to my current,
no, it
right?
went
And
again.
it is
Oh,
a,
oh,
are we back?
oh, it just came back. Yeah.
Okay. So I will
Yes.
say
Sorry,
that
sorry. Go
I
ahead.
will say that it is a whole different ballgame to have a secure partner and to be
It
behaving securely,
is.
because then vulnerability is authentic. You don't worry about, well, if I bring this up in the relationship, it's going to start this huge fight, or, so I can't bring it up. Or I'm having a
Yes.
really bad day, but my partner doesn't like it when I'm upset, and they avoid me if I'm upset, so I can't show a natural emotional response to something, right?
Right.
I mean, there is absolutely nothing in this world that I feel like I couldn't tell my husband.
Mm.
No
And what a
matter how
feeling that is.
painful, no matter how hurtful or
Yeah.
whatever, that in terms of my past or future wants or wishes or anything, that
Yeah.
I would tell him everything.
Everything. And that's security.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's so regulating to my nervous system because I don't have to manage it all.
Yeah.
We need both self-regulation as well as co-regulation in a relationship. We need both. And when we have somebody who is safe to co-regulate with and will give us co-regulation, that's the ultimate recipe for nervous system safety, is being able to, I can make my nervous system safe if I have to, right?
Yeah.
And I will, but also
Yeah.
bring my partner in that journey of sort of soothing each other. That
Yep.
creates real intimacy and real connection.
Oh, it's huge. And I really hope this is resonating with a lot of the listeners that are sitting in those situationships or just taking the
Huh.
crumbs, all of these little terms of our, our new words that we're using, but to recognize and realize that you don't have to stay in that relationship just because you fear you're not going to find something else.
That's right.
It's again, like you said, you know, you're abandoning yourself really, but instead
Sure.
abandon that relationship, work on yourself, and something is going to come along that's amazing. So you, excuse me, you mentioned on your site the 2 simple words that should be used in an argument to help diffuse a situation. What are those 2 words? And explain to us why those 2 words are so impactful.
So important to say, I understand.
Oh, I love it. I say that all the
Because
time.
your first response. So, again, people launch into the trauma responses of defensiveness and blame shifting, which would be under the fight response,
Yeah.
or going cold and shutting down, which might be a flight or freeze response, right?
Mm-hmm.
When someone is telling you something that's difficult,
Yeah.
that it's hard to understand, to wrap your head around, because it's not your perspective. It wasn't your experience in the situation. It's somebody
Yeah.
else's experience that you didn't see through your own eyes or your own lens, to be able to say, I understand. And I understand does not mean I agree.
Okay.
Literally, we are starting with, and this is the start, this isn't where it ends. It's the start of just saying, I'm listening to you and I understand the words coming out of your mouth and they've landed in my brain. Right?
Yes. Which is what we all want
I know what
in an
that
argument.
feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean, oh, yes, I agree with you. It means I'm listening and I'm here to learn more. Right? Like I speak English and I heard the words.
And I heard you. Yeah.
And that's actually a great place for people to start, because when they're released from this idea that I understand means I agree,
Yes.
then they can start the process of the active listening, right? That leads to empathy and compassion
and resolution,
and all of those things. And I always tell people, you will get your chance to share your feelings and experiences too, but not until you acknowledge and at least somewhat validate the experiences of your partner. And we can validate not through agreement, but through trying to understand and trying to have compassion and empathy the best that we can.
And how long do you continue down that road when you say, I understand, and you're listening and you're looking for that resolution? How long? I mean, I know you want to listen and sit back and take it in, and then you can kind of turn it to yourself and say, okay, now this is where I'm coming from. And hopefully they're going to understand in the same way.
Right. So I have in my program, I've created what I call the no-fail conflict resolution plan, because it took me 2 years to make. And, it's from all of my experience working with clients. And I always say if you follow the rules, then no fail. You will get to a solution and everybody will stay regulated, because I sort of force the capacity building tools within. So you have to kind of take a break and then do your capacity building and then response plan, and then come back together and share your responses. Right. What I tell people to sort of start with is like when somebody is sharing, a feeling or an experience or something that they want to see changed or whatever, you have to first understand it. Like it doesn't have to make sense in terms of like, I think you should feel that way, but it has to make sense in terms of like, I know what you're talking about. Like, I know what you're talking about, or I know, like, I understand how you're interpreting the situation, right?
Yeah.
I understand your lens, whether I agree with it or not. I at least understand it.
I understand it.
Page there, right? And then oftentimes I tell people, I'm like, usually there needs to be some kind of accountability taken. If your partner is saying you hurt me, then loving that partner means that you're taking the time to understand where you missed the mark. And where people fail is that they focus way too much on intention and not on impact. So a lot of people get very defensive because they were like, well, that wasn't my intention, therefore you shouldn't feel that way.
Right.
But if you focus on impact first, you have to deal with the impact in front of you. And so you have to say, okay, I'm accountable. I did say that thing, or I did do that thing, and I recognize that it didn't feel good to you. And that's stepping out of the, should it have felt bad to you, or should it have felt good to you, or did you misinterpret me? We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Let's first acknowledge that, yes, I said that thing and I'm understanding that it hurt you. And I hate that I have hurt you. I don't like
Yeah.
that. And I'm very sorry for hurting you. Right. So I always say accountability and apology are often two things. And an apology, I give a very detailed explanation in my program of like when you need one and maybe when you don't, because I
Hmm.
also don't advocate it just saying sorry for the sake of saying sorry when you really
Yes.
feel like you didn't do anything wrong, right? That's a
Yeah.
fawn response. That's also a trauma response. But most
Yeah.
of the time, we hurt our partners because either we were careless,
Hmm.
like we knew that that would probably hurt them if we sat down and thought about it, you know, but we did it anyway, right?
Right. Right.
Or we haven't been paying enough attention to them and we don't know them on a level deep enough to know that that's how they would perceive those words or actions, right?
Right.
And so I get some pushback from people saying, well, you're asking people to walk on eggshells. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm asking you to collect
Mm.
data on your partner over time and use that data to, accordingly to maybe
Yeah.
change up how you word things or, accommodates, some of the things that that have really hurt them in the past. Right?
That makes
If you
sense. Yeah.
know that your partner has a history of being cheated on in their
Mm-hmm.
previous marriage, let's say they were cheated on and they have this sort of betrayal wound, right? You might want to be considerate enough that if you're going to be late to send them a text message and say, hey, I'm caught in traffic, I'm going to be late, versus just showing up a half hour late and
Yeah.
being like, well, I got caught in traffic. Why are you so upset? Right?
Yes.
Them to somebody who's been betrayed or carries a betrayal wound, like the fearful avoidant, that is very dysregulating for them, right? Because that
Yeah.
wound of, well, are they lying to me? Like that's what my other partner used to do, right? They used to come home
Hmm.
late and then tell me I was just crazy, right?
Hmm.
So you get to know your partner based on them as a unique person. And I
Hmm.
don't think you should dance around everybody's wounds. That's not what I'm saying. They have a responsibility to heal themselves as well.
Hmm.
But consideration is important. Consideration is not walking on eggshells. It's getting to know your partner well enough to love them as a unique person.
I love that. I love that. So to kind of summarize all of it with the different attachment styles, I know we covered a lot of really incredible stuff with the different attachment styles. Just reiterate, can you go from an anxious attachment? Can you get yourself to secure? Can both people, if you have a dismissive avoidant and you have an anxious, can you both get to that secure spot? And if so, what are some steps that people can do?
Yes, well, absolutely, because that's what I teach and that's what I
Yes.
do. So,
Send
so
them
yes,
your way, girl.
there's the first step. Although understanding doesn't lead to healing, understanding leads to being willing to look for the tools that do lead to the healing, right? Like you
Mm.
can't change what you don't acknowledge or what you don't understand. And pattern recognition is so huge. So attachment styles are based on a pattern of behavior.
Okay.
Understanding your pattern and your partner's pattern is huge. That's step number one. Step number two is we really got to get control of our minds. We have to
Hmm.
become a master of our minds. And those skills fall under the umbrella of this psychological construct that we call metacognition. And so people can kind of go down the rabbit hole of metacognition, but I teach very specific metacognitive skills in my program that are really geared toward being able to understand, identify, and change your thoughts in real time as they're happening, because all of those thoughts speak to your
Oh,
nervous system. And
yeah.
then the next step is going to be proper emotional processing, which is going to be somewhat unique to your attachment style. Different attachment
Mm.
styles attempt to process emotions in different ways, but there really is one healthy way to process emotions. So
Okay.
I teach that way. And
Okay.
emotional processing has to go hand in hand with neuroregulation, with the regulation of the nervous system. So for people with insecure attachments, their brain has become extremely afraid of their emotions, either
Mm.
because their emotions are out of control and they have no control and it's really painful. And it's just like they have to wait until the emotions die down naturally. And so whenever they have an emotional experience, it's frightening because it's like I'm in so much pain and I don't have any way to make it go away or to do anything. And then the
Yeah.
avoidant, all they do is suppress. So even the tiniest little bit of emotional exposure throws them into overwhelm and throws them into their suppressive avoidance behaviors, which of course cause disruption in relationships. And so you have
Wow.
to be able to learn how to process emotions in a way that the brain feels safe in experiencing them and then can make the decision to integrate the lesson from the emotion into the psyche and then allow that emotional energy to come down and out of the nervous system. And so that is what I teach. And that is honestly, it's the most streamlined way to do it. I think it's the most efficient way to do it, because we can't map every wound we've ever had and where it's coming from, and then, sit in it enough times to try to somehow make it go away. Subconscious mind, where our attachment wounds live, fundamentally it has to have a different experience. It has to have enough different experiences to change the story and decrease the severity of that trigger. So, for example, I carry a big betrayal wound. I've had to have enough experiences, with my husband over time that is not being betrayed, but in fact having my needs met and having him show up for me reliably and considerately. Now my nervous system, if there is a disruption between us, it's a lot easier to stay calm because I know he's going to come through. I know we're going to work it out.
It's coming from a good place.
It's going to be worked out. There's never this doubt in my mind of like, well, oh gosh, this is the fight, right? That like this is the end, or, he's going to go off and he's going to do something to betray me. I know that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Therefore, my nervous system has adapted to those different experiences. Yeah. We can't just speak to our subconscious and say, yes, you're good enough. Stop thinking that you're not good enough. So in a nutshell, we have to have enough experiences brought back to our subconscious to change what lives in there, right? So you can't just speak directly to the subconscious mind and say, you are good enough. I know deep down you felt not good enough in the past, but you are good enough. Yeah. That's not going to change a thing. It's just not. What we have to do is we have to get to the place where we learn to regulate our nervous system in situations where we might not feel good enough. And then we have to have enough experiences where someone treats us as if we are good enough.
Right.
Fully,
so we can recognize the difference.
Wound, right. To fully heal that wound. So there's a lot of that work that we can do ourselves that will allow us to be attracted to people that will bring us the rest of the way around. Right.
Yes. That's such good stuff. This was so great talking to you today because especially, I talk to a lot of my listeners about, a lot of them are coming out of divorce and heartbreak, all of those things, and trying to find their way and navigate into this crazy world of dating and all that stuff. This information is priceless because if you can kind of get a hold of this stuff before you even really put yourself back out there, it's huge, right? I mean, we tend to just come out of heartbreak or tragedy and we jump right back in because we think it's going to heal it instead of just sitting in it and figuring things out.
Yes.
So this is just perfect. So let everybody know where they can find you, what courses you have, your website, your social handles, all that good stuff.
Yes. So I am on TikTok at The Dating Decoder.
Great.
I'm on Instagram at The Dating Decoder, Facebook at The Dating Decoder. YouTube is under Dr. Sarah Hensley. My website is thedatingdecoder.com. I'm not sure when this episode will drop, but after the first of the year, we are rebranding because I've become so big that The Dating Decoder just doesn't capture everything that I do now. So the brand is just going to be Dr. Sarah Hensley, the Love Doc, after the first of the year.
Oh, I love it.
That transition. So if you see The Dating Decoder kind of go away, the website will redirect you to the new URL. Yeah. So no worries there. You'll still be able to find me.
Amazing. Congrats on your success. I can see why. It's wonderful. So before you go, I'd like to play a little game called From Mrs. to Ms. Fun Facts. It's just a would you rather this or that related to what you talk about. You ready? Okay. Top 10 questions. Would you rather have your partner surprise you with an over-the-top romantic gesture or something totally practical that shows they've been paying attention to your needs?
Totally practical. I would so much rather, because that shows that they know me and they're collecting data on me, and they're going to get it right in a lot of other areas if they're collecting that data.
I love that. Number 2, would you rather have a partner who's a fantastic kisser but terrible at flirting, or someone who's an expert flirt but just okay at kissing?
Ew, no, has to be a good kisser. I can hold up the flirting end. I can hold that end up, but no, you got to be a good kisser.
I can't help but wonder what happens to all the bad kissers out there.
Oh, I don't know, because nobody's telling them, right? No one's telling them.
I don't even think you can teach it. It's just we just failed.
I know. That's right.
Okay,
That's
it's too
right.
much. Number 3, would you rather go on a date with someone who only talks in emojis or someone your choices here aren't good, or someone who insists on bringing their mom to every date?
I'll go with the emojis. I think we can probably communicate better than mom being stuck in all of our dates.
Love it. I mean, it's great. Number 4, would you rather fall for someone who makes you laugh uncontrollably or someone who gives you butterflies every time they walk in the room?
Butterflies are actually not a good sign. Remember,
I was
your
curious
sign.
that because I'm trying to get the consensus on that one. They're more a sign of like a red flag, like a beware,
It
right?
is. It is. Yes, it is. It's a fear response. I would say laughing. My husband is the funniest human being on the face of the earth.
Oh,
And, laughing gives us so many good neurotransmitters in our brain that
yes.
it's so healing to the soul.
That's
So
the
I'm going to go with
one.
laughter.
How did you meet him? Did you meet him online
I
or
did.
you did?
He sent me a Facebook message.
Oh,
At the time, I actually, unfortunately, blew him off because I was sort of in a no dating phase. And
yeah.
then he popped up on my social media and I was like, who is that hot dude?
Oh.
I was like, oh my gosh, that name sounds so familiar. And I looked back into my messages and he had sent me a message, like a really heartfelt, like, I love the content that you're posting on your social media because we were both big Christians and I was posting a lot of Christian content.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, thanks. And that was like all I
Poor guy.
I sent him another message that was like, hey, I'm kind of sorry I blew you off. I was just a little overwhelmed, and I wasn't, taking the time to really get back to you because I was just very much in a no men space. I had sort of sworn off dating. So, but I'm dating now. So,
Yeah.
how are you? And then he asked
There's
me
the flirt.
there. Yeah.
But that just speaks to how you have to be in the right place to accept it, right? It may be a totally different story had you accepted it the first time instead of just saying thanks, Okay, number 5, blindfolded surprises or playful role play?
I would say playful role play.
Oh, I like it.
Like having my senses taken.
Oh, well, then you might like this one. Would you rather have the ability to read your partner's mind during sex or be able to control their sensations with just a touch?
Oh, I'd control their sensations because I don't want to get my feelings hurt if he's like distracted or something, right? Like there's
it can't be good all the time.
Humans should be able to keep to themselves.
I agree. Okay, number 7, trying new positions or mastering the classics?
Ooh, I would say change it up.
Yeah.
Get
Look
some
a little
variety.
of both.
Yeah. Have a variety.
Have a variety. Number 8, would you rather develop a secure attachment style by facing your emotional fears head on or slowly evolve your attachment style through long-term self-reflection and personal growth?
I say open the door and look the monster in the face.
Rip the Band-Aid off. Just
rip it off.
Do
right?
it.
I say rip it off because, slowly over time, again, there's a lot of ways you can talk yourself out of the work.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And when you and oftentimes when you open that door, the monster is not nearly as scary as you thought it was.
Great point.
It's not.
It's not.
And I've been through some really significant trauma.
Yeah.
You got to face it, but you got to face it in a way that the brain can feel safe facing it. Again, that's where emotional processing and neuroregulation have to be of one, have to happen together in order to heal.
Yeah. Agreed. Number 9, would you rather have a partner who constantly checks in on you throughout the day or one who prefers to give space but shows deep affection in person?
I like the check-ins.
Check-in all day long?
Check-ins. I do.
Do you think does that come from an anxious attachment, from that little bit that you need? Because that's kind of what that is, right? You're like, I haven't heard from them, where they're not coming back kind of thing.
I mean, but I think when you reach a really deep level of intimacy, you want to talk to your partner, like you want to check in, like marriage should be so much an of one situation. Now, I definitely think each person needs some independence. They need things that are just theirs, right? Like my husband plays pickleball, I jazzercise, he plays in the church worship band. I have other things that I do, but I wouldn't feel great going a whole day and not being like, hey, how are you? Because like, what if he's having like a difficult day and that check-in is something that
Yeah.
just kind of gets him through? Or, for him and me, like I like feeling like my husband knows where I am and what I'm doing. If
Mm-hmm.
if there was, heaven forbid, a car wreck or a safety issue,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just like, well, I'm not heard from her all day, and that's the norm. He's there's not going to be any immediate red flag of like she
Yeah.
okay, right? So for me, especially just as a woman and it being a safety issue, I really love the check-ins.
That's a great point. I didn't really think about it that way. Great point. Okay, last one. Slow dancing in the living room or spontaneous dance moves in the kitchen?
Oh gosh, we do both. That's a hard
Oh,
one.
ooh, I
What's
love
a
it.
hard one? I'm gonna go with the slow dance. It's
Yeah,
intimate,
it
and
is.
and it's we love a lot of like bluegrass. We're from Kentucky, and so
Uh-huh.
a lot of beautiful bluegrass music is made here. We have a lot of beautiful and bluegrass is really can be really slow and really fun to sort of slow dance to, believe it or not.
Oh,
Really romantic in some ways.
yeah. I think those little things are so much sexier than we give them credit for. Very
For sure.
underrated. So,
Yeah.
well, amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was
Thank
such an incredible
you.
episode and so informational. I'm
I
sure
appreciate
the
it.
listeners are going to love it and have lots of questions and everything. So I will put everything in the show notes so they know where to find you. And you can go and look up her course and her website. You have incredible videos on TikTok. You are killing it on there. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
And thank you once again for joining me. To the
Thank you.
listeners out, absolutely. To the listeners out there, please let me know if you have any additional questions or concerns, comments, things you want to talk about. You can reach me at info@frommrs2ms.net. You can find me on any major streaming platform. And I hope you guys have a fantastic week. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, Andrea.